Okay, I'm live now. Can you see it?
Um, Currently at a black screen, working on it. One sec. Okay, it says stream starting soon.
It should switch over here to this, but
Yeah, it's just whatever that's called, the delay thing.
yeah.
Um, Currently at a black screen, working on it. One sec. Okay, it says stream starting soon.
It should switch over here to this.
Yeah, it's just whatever that's called, the delay thing. Oh, oh, there we go.
Okay, yeah, it just might take a while for you to see my stuff. It's a little bit annoying, but more images here.
Oh, oh, there we go.
I love hearing the delay on your screen.
Yep.
Try and lower the volume a bit, just so that at least it's not hearing here. The only thing you need to hear is realistically, you just need to see the PowerPoint. Okay, I guess we can. Okay, shaders.
Yep.
Okay, hold on. Okay, I guess we can. Where is it? I'll just take this.
Star Wars.
All right, let's get started here. I want to go back to the top slide and just put it in slideshow mode here. This is actually kind of cool. Hopefully, this first episode runs smoothly
Mm-hmm.
and nothing bad happens. All right, let's get started here. I'll go back to the slide. All right. This is actually kind of cool. Well, let's get started. You see the first slide already?
What makes a good video game?
Yep, featuring Nicholas. All right,
That's
so
my
let's go on to the
name.
next slide. Might take a bit for it to update on you. We're gonna have to figure out a better way to do this. Probably, yeah, I don't know exactly how we can do this. But okay, this is your boy Nybrisk, and welcome to the first episode of a video game podcast. I'm still not sure how
Video game.
we are going to title this show, but we're just gonna roll along and hopefully something comes along where we can officially put a title on this. However, my partner Nick, would you like to introduce yourself really fast?
I'm Nick.
There we go. That was a pretty fast introduction. So, a little bit of background. Nick and I have been playing video games for a while, and we've had this idea of starting this podcast and just talk about our favorite video games, some of our not so favorite video games, and essentially what makes a video game fun to play or not
Loaded
so fun
with
to
the
play.
sauce, as you would.
Right.
I'm Nick.
And so on this slide, we're going to tell you so essentially the 5 points that we're going to be talking about in today's podcast. It'll be a very broad overview of video games. We're not going to be on for too long here, but we're going to talk on story, gameplay, music, art style, and graphics. This is in no particular order of importance, but just some talking points for now. Okay, so we're gonna start with story, right? And then we can divide it into essentially two different types of conflicts. We have our internal conflicts versus our external conflicts. And I believe that God of War, Ragnarok, or even just the original one, has this pretty flushed out almost to the point where it kind of leaves you with a very, very rounded characters. Nick, do you want to talk about your experience with God of War Ragnarok?
It, well, first off, fucking fantastic. I don't know if I should swear. Whatever.
It's okay. Just let it
um, it's just it's a great game. I teared up multiple times because it has this storytelling, this conflict, this um just experience that it's like you feel with what the characters feel to an extent, which is really cool to see because I feel like that's something that until somewhat recently, typically that was just like a movies or literature thing, and the fact that it's kind of been brought over to an interactable experience is just really cool.
Yeah, and I totally agree with the fact that it has taken a while for.
Because I mean, even early video games, it's just they were just like the point, click the button, run away, or move around the screen while your guide it was like doot 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 doot.
Yeah, I feel like also in the early stages of video games, right? I think most developers were mainly trying to get familiarized with the engines and what an engine was,
Mhm.
like a physics engine or a video game engine. So they probably put more of their focus on the gameplay side, right, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But they try and make sure that, oh, what can I do with this kind of style? Like, can I do a jump here? Can I add a spell? Can I, they were trying to have essentially a sandbox area where that's all their focus. And in some games, it's fun. That's why a lot of platformers early on in the day were very popular. It's not necessarily a huge story, but they were mainly gameplay driven. And like you were saying, I like the touch that mainly we haven't seen this storytelling in video games. We only saw it, like you said, in literature, in books, or in movies, which is something that has been going on for years now, not necessarily as long as video games. Right, video games are pretty new into this storytelling era, where I think a lot of developers have gotten a lot of praise and a lot of attention for not only making a good game, but putting in a very, very strong story, right? For example, and in that, right, in most movies and characters and shows that you watch, a lot of people are gravitated toward a favorite character, right? Having good, flushed out characters. Again, we can talk about God of War and the development of Atreus, the development of
Kratos.
Kratos, and even in the characters, for example, more iconic ones like your Master Chief from Halo. I mean, those are,
Mhm.
like I said, mainly. It's just, to me, that's the things that you remember, right? You get either relatable, you get a sense of relationship with the character, or you relate to that character depending on their trials and tribulations, right? That they encounter. A lot of people with Atreus, right? It's like a coming of age story to an extent from the first video game to the second. You try and see him grow up and mature and take on more responsibilities that his father has already taken. And now Kratos is taking the responsibility of raising a child and trying to not only put on this face of a general, right, but trying to put a face of a father, which is something that you don't really expect out of Kratos, since especially in the first God of Wars 1, 2, and 3, he's killing machine. I mean, he's the God of War.
He's just
expecting him
hack
to,
and slashing.
yep, expecting him to come back and step that down into more of a carrying side that he himself has been able to close off because of all of essentially the killing that he's done throughout the years. He kind of shut that point off and doesn't really care too much about feelings. In any event, um, yeah, I think that this is a very crucial component in stories nowadays that I feel that developers are already comfortable with some of the engines and some of the gameplay of it, that they're starting to put in and bring in a lot of good writers. I was actually in a live stream the other day with Insomniac Studio, and they were talking about their hiring, and I was listening, and the top position that get the most resumes out of are writers now, which I think is awesome because that lends to say that they're trying to recruit more writers that are able to build a very organic dialogue between the characters, which is something that I'm very excited about. And hopefully, Insomniac, as their past record with the video game that they've come out with, I am very excited to see in the future to see how they implement those resources. But we are going to move on quickly, unless you have any last remarks on this topic, Nick.
No, I'm good.
All right. So now we're gonna go into the other big boy, which is gameplay, right? And this is a essentially like we said in the early days, this was all that you really cared about, right? Is how the game played. Even the first video game, Pong, right? It was just about competition, about beating your opponent in the Pong game, which is something that's really cool. But now we've come a long way, Nick, and there are a plethora of different types of games that you can play, ranging from turn-based games, most famous one, Slay the Spire, and then to your RPG MMOs, like your RuneScapes back in the early days. I'd say early days, but I mean early games of video games where massive online multiplayers are a thing. To your first-person shooters and open worlds. How do you think? Why do you think that gameplay has developed so far up to this point, Nick?
Well, just as technology has advanced and people have sort of begun to realize that they have much more control over, like, I mean, just programming wise. Like, I know that the first, like, Mario theme song had 3 notes because that is all that the software, the hardware, I mean, could handle. It couldn't handle more inputs. So it's just as that has expanded to such a massively wide range, people can more freely decide exactly what they want to be doing, and pretty much sky's the limit. With I want to make a game about mopping floors, and that's it. Like you can do that. We are allowed to do that now. Meanwhile, like it's like I want to write a game about I don't I don't know. I used
Right.
up my only good idea, which was the mopping floor
Right,
game.
and you're right. I mean, they've come a long way with programming, and it's pretty amazing. Out of these, Nick, out of all of the games that you've played, I mean, they put a lot of focus mainly right on a lot of platformers, and then even transitioning to more RPG style. What has, in your opinion, been your favorite game mode to play, and what is your least favorite game mode to play?
I would say it depends on whether or not I'm playing with friends or by myself,
Hmm.
because those are totally different experiences.
Right.
Because if I'm playing by myself, I really like RTS real time strategy games
Right.
where you're just like building up, whether it's like a tower defense game or you're building up like an army and fighting uh, another army or whatever. But then there's the online stuff where I like to be in a game with people. That's where like Fortnite or um, Call of Duty or any of those where you're just kind of with friends hanging out. Um,
Gotcha.
and it's just, I don't know. It really is. It depends on the day. It depends on the mood. I really like pretty much everything.
Gotcha. Yeah, so what did you introduce yourself into gaming with? So on your first days of gaming, what did you play the most?
So my first actual memory of video games was when I was growing up. My dad would play The Battle for Middle Earth 2
Mm-hmm.
on one of those ancient computers. I actually have one still and play it from time to time just because I love that game.
Right.
Um, and it's just, I don't know, it's something's very satisfying about having like a big overhead view and having a bunch of little guys just running and like throwing each other and just getting launched in the air. That kind of stuff is just great. I love it.
Awesome. All right. I'll follow up with that and say that for my experience, the earliest memories that I have for video games definitely had to be GameCube, and I went to a friend's house, and I believe it was the earlier version of Mortal Kombat and a
Mm.
racing game. That was the first ever time that I personally have played. It was funny because you know how in Mortal Kombat, right? If you die, you could theoretically input a combination
Mhm.
to revive yourself. Like that was an Easter egg back in the day. We can talk about Easter eggs in a future episode.
Mhm.
But nobody in our, I mean, I was like 4 or 5 years old at the time. I mean, I was young.
Oh yeah, no
I was
one.
like, so nobody, even in my friend group, we're not the people that I was playing with. They didn't know how to do it either, but they just knew it existed, right? And they were
Mhm.
older than me, right? And they would let me play. They would hit me with the old school move of give me the controller, but the controller was never plugged in, kind of
Oh yeah.
thing. But I was smart enough to know that there were times where I was actually playing, and then those times, right, when I died, I button mashed. I don't know what I did. I button mashed, and then I got it to work. I figured it out. I don't know what buttons I pressed, but I came back to life. And I was so hyped up, and I was trying to play, and then my friends were trying to take the controller from me, like, how'd you do that? How'd you do that? I'm like, just let me play this game right now. So I was one of the first ones to actually button mash my way into a cheat code that I think I will probably never replicate that feeling or
Oh
moment
yeah.
ever in life. But
That's
I
a
thought
one
that
in a
was
million.
that was pretty cool in my opinion. But anywho, let's move on to the next slide here in our discussion, and another big point is our music. All right, and I think this is very vital, especially nowadays, and even in the even in the first stages of games. Soundtracks, music, and sound effects were a big driver in remembering iconic moments in the video game, and this led to nowadays having even composers of different movies, right, come in and do soundtracks and for various different video games that have probably made a huge impact in how you navigate, right, and focus the story. I've always had this analogy of, especially when it comes to movies, there are movies are a big part, right? A lot of pictures, right? You're just focusing your eyes, and there's a lot of information on your screen. How I like to
Mhm.
think about it is music and sound is the or the writer's or the director's way of focusing your eyes to look at something. There are a lot of different scenes where they have a variety of choices to make on let's say you're in a landscape with, let's say you're in a street, right, in a busy street in downtown New York, right? There are going to be a lot of sounds if you were actually there, and there's going to be very hard for you to pick out, right, where the characters are or what to look at, even if the characters are not there. And the director can say, well, let's hone in, let's mix this car coming out of the parking lot, let's have that be the main sound that you hear, so that when you look at the screen, right, you're focusing on that car that's coming up, because maybe that car has your characters in it, but you don't know yet, or that car is going to be an important role in a little bit, but it's important for you to know that it's there. So those are the
Hmm.
things that I think people underestimate and don't really critically think about how much music and sound impacts the way that you not only watch a movie but tell a story. In this case, play a video game. It can
Hmm.
definitely affect it. For example, some of the better soundtracks that I've listened to lately, these are not all of them, right? Just throwing examples out of the top of my head is Journey, for example, and Abzu, and even Mario Odyssey. Those are, I mean, when you finish a video game, there's a reason why you can remember the Star Wars soundtrack. You can remember the Mario
Hmm.
soundtrack, right? I mean, those have been for like years and years and years. You just instinctively know about it. I don't know if you've got. I don't think you've gotten a chance to play Journey or Abzu, but what are some of the games that you think when you've played it that the music just really not only wrapped everything nicely, but made you think critically about the game and say, man, that was a fun game, and this music soundtrack really puts you in that mood, you know?
I mean, the big one that comes to mind is Doom Eternal. That game would not be anywhere close to how good it is without its soundtrack. It it's
Oh, shoot, Nick, pause. My pizza's ready. I need pizza time. I forgot that it was, you know, you can continue talking to the audience. I will just take my pizza
word
out of the oven.
word. But yeah, with Doom Eternal, it's just it the deep droning in the slower parts when the just heavy drums and guitar and everything once it starts to pick up and you're fighting and you're well, it's a violent game, you're ripping people apart and the music perfectly displays like the amount of intensity that would be required to be in that situation.
I saved the pizza.
That's the most important thing.
Gotcha. All right. And then also, like I said, a lot of sound effects are also very crucial in remembering a game, but also in having that audio cue, right? And it's very, I think, important in a Call of Duty game, for example, in an FPS where it's very fast paced. Not only is it satisfying to hear a gun reload, and you can tell that they put a lot of time into recording different guns, into recording different handles of guns, right? Because even when you grab a gun, even when you reload it, when you shoot it, it's pretty realistic. Almost to a degree where I think most Call of Duty players that have played for years, if they were to hear that gun shoot, they would probably be able to recognize it. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
these sound effects come from real life guns, so it's actually pretty cool to remember. Hey, maybe that's a Deagle, that's an M16, right? That's a regular car assault rifle. So in a lot of cases, sometimes I'm even when I hear a gunshot, or even when there's gameplay in the background and I hear it, I can immediately tell which gun the player is using just by those sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
But even going on, like games such as Clash Royale or Among Us that have sound effects that you even remember after the game. And when you hear it, it gives you that audio cue. For example, the vent sound in Among Us. I mean, that's
Oh yeah.
pretty much well known. And even that, even the killing animation as well, not the
Mm-hmm.
killing sound. So some of these little things that if the game and the producers and the developers can hone in correctly, it can navigate the game pretty perfectly, and not only that, but leave a lasting memory to the player to say, man, you know that was pretty cool, and it becomes a talking point after you play the game. And be like, hey, do you remember this part and this part? But it also helps with competitive gaming. What do you think about sound effects, Nick?
Oh yeah. I mean, like even beyond like a story aspect, there are so many little things with that too. Like in video games, a lot of the time when you like shoot your last shot in a gun, it'll sound slightly different and just give you sort of hints and just these hidden messages to help you throughout the game, whatever it is you're doing. Or like if you go and you step on something and it um, just like creaks a little bit, you might be like, "Oh, is there a secret here? Is there something to do? Do I need to break the floor? Do I need to do this, or this?" And it really sound just does a fantastic job of tying everything together, going back to the gameplay, going back to the story. It really just it's the connector, I suppose.
Right, and I think that is a very insightful note that you made, and yeah, it's not necessarily the backbone of the game, more so, like you said, more like the ligaments, the connections, how it comes into fruition holistically. It's, it is the glue. It is the in between filler that makes it such an amazing way to experience a game when it is done correctly. And we'll talk about the next point now. We're segue right into our art style of the game, which is, I'm going to differentiate art style with, let's say, our graphics, because graphics is also very, very different in terms of rendering and when it comes to ray tracing. We'll get into that in a little bit. But here we can talk about more so, let's say, more of a level design perspective and a character design perspective. How does the art style affect the mood of the game and how it is played? For example, you have a very, in my opinion, impressive game that does this beautifully, and it's Cuphead. Every single image that you see on the screen is hand drawn. Every single one, which is, I think, amazing. And I think they did a very, very good job at making it such a beautiful game to watch, but also very difficult game to play. But as you go along the missions, right, these characters and these animations are very much cartoon like. That's the feel that they want to get. More, if you go back to your Popeye the Sailor Man, I mean, I think that even those exaggerated movements are very much well flushed out. That the enemies, even though let's say this enemy's a flower, right? It's very much personified in a way that you think that it's a person. And I think that's a really cool aspect of video games, that if you can get also the feel for the game by the art style, then it gives you a nice way of picturing the game and kind of immersing yourself into it, right? Because you have your Minecraft where the art style is very simplistic, right? Not over. It's actually takes this type of concept and dumbs it down all the way to a very simple pixelated version of the entire uh, game as it progresses, as opposed to, let's say, a Destiny game, a Halo game, an Elden Ring game, where you have to really go with this detailed, gory, or even in the armors in Destiny, right? Being able to add these little pieces of colors, of um, designs, and of a whole variety of things that you can add into your customizations, that there's a very wide spectrum, and I feel that choosing how much you want to go towards a spectrum of very high detailed art style versus a very low detail art style can make it work, right? I think it can make it work, because there's some games, I forgot the game that it was called, but it's all black and white. It was a platformer, and they can make it work, right? It's about choosing this art style. What do you think? How do you think companies choose, Nick, the art style based on the game that they want to play?
I think it really depends. Um, I mean, there are factors that lead up to it. Like, indie developer is not going to be able to have hyper realistic character design. It's just not. It takes a lot of manpower to get that kind of thing done.
Right.
But in my mind, that doesn't change the quality of whatever game it is. There are games like Broforce, for example. It's super little guys that are just running around, super pixelated. It's like 16-bit, but it's enough, and it builds an entire world around that, and it's cool to see characters and experience different, like, if you think of any enemy or any villain in any game, you could reimagine that villain to fit infinite amounts of art styles, and I wouldn't say that any one of them is necessarily the right one or the best one. It really is just a expressive and creative, artistic, like, just I don't know. It honestly, I'm just blanking on the word.
Gotcha.
Starts with an R, but whatever, doesn't matter.
Sweet.
It just, I don't know. I think that it's a beautiful, beautiful thing that can be done so many ways, like with Cuphead, like you said, or with like Star Wars Battlefront with the beautiful ray tracing and shining armor and all of that, or like somewhere in the middle, something that's kind of clunky, but it's like a lovable clunky.
Right.
Um,
And going alongside of that, I feel as though some of these art styles and graphics. Speaking of which, let's move on to that really quick because these go very much hand in hand here. But let's talk about graphics in terms of shaders and ray tracing, and it really goes along with how much detail you want the player to see and whether that detail is important because and that's the key part, right? Whether it's important, since it's been a huge talk in the past few years, especially with next gen consoles coming around, with new graphics cards, with new capabilities, and players demand very high quality games that look, to a degree, they want it to look hyper realistic to the point where they don't really want to see that it's a video game. Right? They want to make it feel like as though they're playing something in real life, especially when you come to the VR sets and the VR that are coming out. They don't. They're gonna want to spend their money, right? They're already paying $500, $550 for a new console, and they don't want to see a pixelated cartoon, right? Which, to a degree, I get. There is a, you want to get the most out of the things that you're buying, especially when they're this premium and this expensive nowadays. And not only that, but hard to find. That the player should expect some degree of quality associated with it in terms of graphics. But I do agree with you that these sections, right, these characteristics in games like graphics and art style, I feel as though they're more of a fingerprint or a trademark for a game, right? They're not gonna carry the game in any way. They're not going to impact necessarily how you play the game, but it's more of this. I remember Mario Kart because of the let's say the items, right? Everybody remembers that iconic box, right? That loot box for that iconic characters. It just shows the identity of the game rather than the actual whole of the game. If that makes sense, it's more like a front, like a package, like a wrapping paper toward the game. Because if let's say you're unboxing a gift, right, and it's really well wrapped, It's the best wrapping paper. It's made out of silk. The bow is all pretty nice. But if you unravel it and you have a bad gift, just because it is wrapped nicely doesn't make the gift less worse to you as an experience, right? If the bad gift is not going to make it less bad because it's wrapped correctly. So this is very much a double-edged sword in that players are demanding very high graphics to the point where a lot of developers are putting a lot of time into this, that they are sacrificing the performance of the game. They're sacrificing how the game plays, where it might look like a beautiful game. And the beautiful example here is Star Wars Battlefront 2, where I believe its shaders and ray tracing are far beyond what they were when they came out for the PlayStation 4. And even for today's standard of games, I mean, it's a very, very high level.
It holds up.
Right? It does not lack in any shape, way, or form to some of our high tier games right now, like the newer Call of Duties, which have had really good ray tracing throughout the next couple of years. However, this game does not hold back. And this game had a pretty terrible launch. I mean, people didn't like playing the game. There were a lot of microtransactions that happened in the game. And it really took away from the experience of the players, regardless of how much they enjoyed how it looked.
Yeah, and like for me personally, I I have this mixed feeling about graphics because it's almost like a "I got you, bitch" sort of situation with games because you see these trailers that are just super awesome and they look great. There's explosions, there's whatever. But then if you get into the game and it's just like, all right, you spawn in, you walk around, you die. There's an enemy that you can't hit. It's clipping through the floor. Its hitbox doesn't exist. It's actually behind you now. Like if any of that kind of stuff is in the game, that's not the stuff that you would see in a trailer. That's not the stuff that you would be like pulled in by. And not to mention the fact that the amount of like price points of video games has gone up so much just because it takes so much computing power just to create these graphics and these smooth transitions and all of that stuff. But it just I don't know. I just don't think it's what makes or breaks a video game.
I agree. I think that it's become essentially more of a bottleneck even nowadays, rather than a positive, where even when it comes to runtime, even some games, I even saw this in God of War Ragnarok, which I thought was surprising. When you first start the game, it'll give you the option to either have graphics like all the way up, or you can bring down the graphics to save on performance. And I was even shocked by that when I first read it, and I was curious to see, well, if you have that option, right? I mean, I think personally it was due to people still having the PS4, right? And that's probably why they have that option. And I had a PS5, and I just maxed out the graphics. I was like, I'm pretty sure my PlayStation should be able to handle this, no problem, right? And for the most part, I did. I never had any issues with lag or nothing, which I thought was pretty good. But the fact that games are having to add those options because you're sacrificing a lot of the actual gameplay that you do because it cannot render the textures fast enough because there's so much data it has to be able to update every single second that it's lagging behind, then what's the point, right? You're reverting back to what you didn't want in order to play the game.
Yep.
So it just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like it's the best option when players say, "Oh, I want graphics that one, this, that one, that one." In reality, you don't want that because you at the end of the day prioritizing how you play the game rather than how it looks, right? So very much double-edged sword. Very much you need to be careful with this push and pull scenario here because it can either help you or it can be a bottleneck. It can be a hindrance. It can betray you when you start to apply it. And especially now, not only in a single player game, but even in a multiplayer scenario where you have this super realistic game, but now you're creating a bottleneck in terms of the Wi-Fi, like how fast the
Hmm.
internet is in order to even render all that stuff. So,
Yep.
like I said, and I'm blessed to have really fast internet, but I guarantee you, most people that play games do not have that option. Right? I even tell my friends that have been playing for years at the place that they're living at, they don't have good Wi-Fi, and don't even have like an Ethernet cable that you can plug into your PlayStation, which is also a big difference in terms of how you experience the game. All right, now we're gonna move on to the very last thing here, Nick, and to wrap things up. And I think I have actually three Pokemon packs that we can open really quickly before the end of the video.
Yo.
These are, mind you, these are packs from Thailand. My girlfriend got them for me when she went over to Thailand, and she got three packs. And I was kind of mad because she said that there were so many, like a whole box full of them. And I was like, why didn't you buy the whole box? I would have paid for the whole box. She's saying that they were so cheap, like they were about $1 each. I was like, what? I was so mad. But nonetheless, right? Here are the last bit of information. And we've talked about these topics. We've briefly talked about these topics and how they affect a game and how you play a game. And I've compilated here a tier list, and I told Nick beforehand, right after we talk about these, what are your top five, or how would you rank these characteristics in the game in terms of most important to least important? And I also did it myself, and here are comparisons, right? So we seem to be pretty agreeable on the last two, which I think that's fine on the art style and graphics, and we very much talked about it a lot here before this about how it can be a good thing, but also it can also hinder you on it, and not there shouldn't be too much focus on it. It's rather a footprint rather than a a machine, right? Rather than like an actual thing that it runs on.
Hmm.
But here, Nick, you put gameplay as number one, and I put music as number one, right? So why did you put gameplay as number
Cause, well, coming as someone who plays such a vast variety of different games, from Stardew Valley to your typical first-person shooters to card games to real-time strategy games, MMOs, RPGs, all of that stuff. Um, I just feel like the very most important thing to a game is the gameplay fun? Is what you're doing with your controller a good time? And music music I put second just because although it is so crucial to bringing the gameplay to the next level and bringing the experience up, I think that the experience can't exist with just the music. If the gameplay isn't good, it doesn't matter how good the music is.
one? Right. And that's an interesting. That's a good point. I conversely, my addition to that is I sometimes when it comes to games, right, when you're doing a very mundane task, or you're farming, or let's say you're doing something pretty boring, right? There's a reason why when you wash the dishes or when you're doing chores, you have music blasting, right? You have something to motivate you.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when you have music heightening that sense and getting you into a different space, even when you have to do really boring tasks in video games or have really bad gameplay in a certain section, the music can change that mood for you, and the music can heighten that or make that task less daunting or less, I guess, boring in that manner if it's done correctly. And that's why I put music up to number one. since in even if you have a very good video game, right? I don't think every video game is perfect by any means. There are going to be sections of a video game where it might be more boring than other sections of the video game. And if you put in a very good music soundtrack, it can help you distract you from some of that. Oh, I have to kill 50 of these bad guys. Or oh, I have to kill this, and that, and I think that Doom has a very good example of that. Where I mean, it's a lot of gun ho stuff, right? But there are probably parts where I'll have
Hmm.
to kill so many of these enemies. When you hear that, you're like hyped. It's almost like when you're trying to
Oh
hit
yeah.
a PR, or when you're trying to hit uh, a really high, a difficult lift, right? Getting that hypeness, getting yourself ready to do this task, it makes it a lot easier. It makes it a lot more fun, in my opinion. That's why
Yeah.
I flip my perspective on it and put music as number one, and then gameplay second, and then obviously story right after anything. It has become, in my opinion, more prevalent in games now, even if the story
Yeah.
isn't necessarily very fleshed out, or if it's a very deep story. Just having something there,
Hmm.
it can go back onto the earliest Mario, right? Where you're trying to save Princess Peach. There wasn't any dialogue, I believe. There wasn't any crazy reward after doing it. Just the fact that you knew that Bowser took Peach,
Monster took lady.
now you have to recover Lady. Just having that something simple, right, can give you a purpose to play the game.
Hmm.
And that is what really boils down to, is the purpose. Why are you playing this game, right? And that comes back to the why. There are a lot of things when you play a game. It's oh, it's fun and it's this, but yeah, okay, but why am I playing it? Because a game can be fun, but if you're just playing it just because it can be fun, I think it reduces your retention over time when you don't have a purpose alongside of that. And you can see this very clearly with, let's say, your um, trophies in PlayStation, right? Every game has trophies where you can, when you beat the game, you can say, "Oh, but I'm not done. I can get this. I can get that," and all
Hmm.
these give you purpose to come back and play the game. Now, it's not the same as a story, right? When the story is really well done, you're gonna want to replay it and make sure you get every single dialogue and experiment with the story, but that's essentially what keeps you playing the game after even it's completed, right? It's what gets you to, it's what gets the retention. And I feel like that is what studios trying to are starting to understand a lot better, is that the story that is involved in the game brings retention. The better the story, the better the retention of the game, and the more people are going to come back to play that game, as
Hmm.
opposed to before they didn't really know how to retain players. A lot of it was competitive. And this goes back to the early stages of games with arcades as well, where there was a scoreboard. And that's why you came back to play the game. It was a competitive scene. You wanted to beat that person who was number one, and you wanted to stay there as long as you
Hmm.
possibly could. And the studios have noticed that not every game needs to be competitive. And if it is not competitive, how do I keep the player playing the game? And that's where all these open world games have had a really big push for a good story, that it is very nice to see the evolution and the start and finish of the games as we have it today. And hopefully we have some pretty awesome games to play this year. Very much excited about Spider-Man 2 that's coming out this year. um, Pretty sad opening for Forspoken, I would say.
Yeah.
The story was very, very, very bland. The characters are pretty awful. Like I said, it goes to show again a story that looked really good, had really good animations. Even in the trailer, it had supposedly really good gameplay, but nonetheless provided no purpose to keep playing it, or the purpose is being stripped away from you to the point where it's annoying to play the game. So, yeah, um, we are at, I would say, at a better stage than we were 5 years ago. But there are some aspects where I feel as though we have not improved on, even from 5 years ago, and it's gonna go back to graphics and art style and what people want. But developers have noticed, right, which aspects of the games need to be flushed out more than others,
Mm-hmm.
and it can go back to even God of War Ragnarok. I think they've used the same engine for regular God of War and God of War Ragnarok, and it's just, you know, the more time you put into a physics engine, the more you can do with it. And the
Mm-hmm.
fact that they just said, hey, we're not going to go for this Unreal Engine 5, we're not going to go for this uber realistic graphics and sacrifice what we can do with this game. And they said, now we have experience with this game and this engine. We're just going to keep making it the best it can be by just putting in more hours into something that we're already familiar with and flushing out all the ins and outs and being able to create a story and be able to create a game that will be spoken about generations beyond us as one of the few games that really brings all of these aspects that we've been talking about together very nicely.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is incorporated very well, and it'll be interesting to see how the companies try to replicate, especially in the competitive scene, because competitive games are a little bit different, right? They're derived on competitiveness, but they also know that a lot of gamers aren't that way. So let's hope to see something come out of this year that we can talk about maybe in the later part of the year in our episode, and we can come back to this episode and say, oh, look at how much we talked about this, and look at how much we've seen this be more prevalent in video games.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, this is awesome, and I think this will conclude the last slide on our list to talk about and conclude our last episode here, or not our last episode. Conclude this
Yep.
episode.
First lap. Where it's been a good run. It's been a long run.
Yep. Yeah. If everyone stayed and watched, hopefully you enjoy because it's never come back.
Yep. All
But no,
right.
on the real, like I said, Nick and I have been talking, and we want to do this every weekend, if not every other weekend. So stay tuned out for Saturday nights. Hopefully, it won't be always on a Saturday. We might switch it
Saturday
around
Night Live.
a Friday or a Sunday.
Nick and Paul.
But yeah, we'll make it into a very beautiful series here pretty soon. But thank you for everyone who stayed and watched, or didn't stay but watched at some point, and hopefully got some pretty good points out of this. We'll stay tuned with the next one, and we'll see you guys all later.